over this side, yeah, just this side now. No, I love you all. It's been 2 great days, and today is no exception. We have some tremendous panels, some big deals to be signed, some great speakers. So we're going to get going with our first session. And before I do tell you what that's about, I will remind you again that there's simultaneous translation in English, French, Portuguese, and Arabic. So I recommend that if you want interpretation, you just go and get your interpretation device from the kind ladies and gentlemen over in the corner over there. So pretty much all I'll say is please adhere to the COVID protocols. Keep your distance, keep your mask, sanitize your hands, and please do not move the chairs away from their designated spots. They're put there, obviously, for purposes of COVID protocol. So our first session is called Integrating African Manufacturers into Regional and Global Value Chains, a very important subject that I'm sure is quite pertinent to most of you in this room. It shall be moderated by none other than Lerato Mbele, who is, of course, presenter, Africa Business Report on BBC World News. Give Lerato a round of applause, please.
Shall we all go? Yeah, come with me, please. Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone. You don't seem very enthusiastic for a Wednesday morning. Good morning, everyone. Okay, thank you so much for making the time to be here. I know there are long sessions, long days, networking, business. So you're having early mornings, late nights, but you made it, and we appreciate your time. I think you're over there, Marcella. Okay, and thank you very much to Mark Edo. He does a stellar job, and nobody ever acknowledges Mark. Can we give Mark a round of applause? Absolutely. Yes, sir. Okay, thank you. Please have a seat. I think your name is somewhere there. I've been put so far away from everyone, I feel very disjointed. Never mind. Here we go. Yes, ma'am. It's okay. There we go. It's okay. You know what? Everybody's just chosen a seat. Have a seat, sir. Over here. Come and take a seat here, sir. Please come and have a seat here. There we go. Thank you. Have you been mic'd up?
No. You don't need to. You've got this.
Okay, I've got this.
And you can share between the two of you. Okay, I think we're there. All right, so let me begin by saying thank you very much for your time. My name is Lerato Mbele. Now, we've all heard the words beneficiation, value addition, made in Africa, industrialization. And for me, these are words that are often used interchangeably, mainly by policymakers, to explain what needs to be done to advance manufacturing on the African continent and to boost the value of exports, because by boosting the value of exports, you then generate more export revenue and royalties into the economy. Now, on paper, it looks easy to do, but what we know is that in practice, it's been really hard to accomplish, which is why we are still using the terms beneficiation, value addition, made in Africa, industrialization. It's still an aspiration. If I had to be blunt, which I sometimes am, I would say we haven't arrived at the destination because talk is cheap. I think African leaders are very good at talking a good talk, and they don't really do well on the execution. And with the advent of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, my sincerest hope is that the time has finally come to actualize the aspirations and bring them into reality. And the first step is to create the necessary industrial infrastructure to support manufacturing and the soft infrastructure to improve the quality of skills that would enhance manufacturing on the African continent. And so, with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, I hope we're no longer using nouns, but we're using verbs. When we say industrialization, we can literally point to tangible examples of industrialization across African markets. Our topic for this morning is integrating African manufacturers into the value chain, and our panelists are all distinguished in the work that they do because irrespective of policy, they are taking the necessary steps and the strides, providing either the policy or the financial support or the technical support to start helping those who have had the courage to set up manufacturing plants and factories on the African continent. And so let's get a sense from them what impetus there is on the ground, how much work has been done, and what else still could be done in a constructive way. So let me start off by mentioning who the panelists are, and then what I'm going to do is ask each panelist very briefly just to introduce yourself, your organization, and what you do in less than a minute. But if you could just please warmly welcome Mr. Olukayode Petan, who is the CEO of the Bank of Industry Nigeria, Mr. Ebenezer Tafili, who's the Deputy Director for Capacity Building at the World Customs Organization. We have Ms. Kemi Aroshanyen, who is the Director for the World Trade Center in Miami, Ms. Misela Ntlapu from ARIA, Ms. Gwen Mwaba, who is the Director and Global Head for Trade Finance at AfCFTA, and Mr. Obi Emekwekwe, who's the President of Del Reeve Consult. If you could give them all a warm applause, and we can get into it. Okay, so I've been moaning. I'll stop moaning and hand the floor to you. Tell us a little bit about your organization, sir.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shekara Umar. I'm an Executive Director with Bank of Industry. So sitting here, I'm representing Olukayode Petan, who is the MD of Bank of Industry. Unfortunately, he's engaged at another level, national issues. We are a DFI, a Development Finance Institution, and for now, probably the next 10, 20 years to come, we remain the foremost development finance institution in Nigeria.
Fantastic. Sir, if you could pass on your microphone.
We share it. There's no
Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning. I am Ebenezer Tafili, Deputy Director of Capacity Building at the World Customs Organization, which is in Brussels. Our job is to help customs administrations around the world in their reform and modernization so that they can be better partners of trade. Thank you.
Thank you. Gwen?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gwen Mwaba. I'm the Director and Global Head for Trade Finance at the African Export and Import Bank. AfCFTA is the co-convener of this important event that we're all attending through the course of this week. AfCFTA, in short, is a development finance institution which is basically set up to stimulate intra- and extra-African trade for all of our member states across Africa. Thank you.
Obi?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Obi Emekwekwe. I am president of Del Reeve Consult. It's a Africa-focused communications organization, and what we try to do is to assist African businesses to gain visibility, to be able to reach out into the international market and see how they can make their work better known, make their products better known outside. And that also translates into working within the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area to go across borders in Africa, showcase your work.
Misela?
Good morning. My name is Misela Ntlapu. I'm the CEO of African Rail Industry Association. My mandate as an association as an export council as well is to grow local manufacturing capacity so that we can take the skills onto the continent and share the skills with our brothers and sisters. We need to re-industrialize Africa in order for us to make sense of intra-Africa trade and to achieve the goals of the African Union. Thank you.
Okay, and finally, Kemi.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kemi Arosoin. I'm Trade Director for Africa and Caribbean at the World Trade Center Miami, and I serve as the Director at the Center for International Trade Development Miami. My key objective is to support African exports into the Americas market. World Trade Center Miami is a member of the World Trade Centers Association with global headquarters in New York. We have over 300 centers in more than 90 countries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we all have a sense of where you come from and the work that you do. Let's start with you, Mr. Omar. Very briefly, you represent a DFI in Africa's largest and most, I'd say, dynamic economy, just in terms of factoring concerns and integrating them into regional economic communities and ultimately, if the chance arises, into the global value chain system.
Thank you very much.
I think it's on.
It's on. Thank you very much. Can you
Maybe not. It says on. It's on now. Great.
Thank you very much. That's a good question for us, especially in BOI. Let me even start by acknowledging the team that came with us. We have an executive director and quite a number of general managers present. We have quite a number of our customers that are here, and therefore we are here to support them. Majorly, our responsibility is to support our customers. But ideally, what we've done is to make sure that, first and foremost, is to make sure that customers in Nigeria and would-be customers in Nigeria have funding opportunity with Bank of Industry, because that is key to us. If you are unable to provide them with funding, then you are not relevant to them. Funding in what respect? Our loans are maximum 10%.
Wow.
Yes, 10% interest, irrespective of what you are doing. So long as you are adding value, we will give you loan at 10%. Quite different from what commercial banks do, minimum 25 to 30%. And we believe that if any manufacturer goes to take a loan at 25 to 30%, it's just a question of time. 5, 10 years maximum, they go into problems. But when you provide them with funding at a very low rate, interest rate, and a long term, because you don't blame the commercial banks. The funds they have are not theirs, right? So funds belonging to individuals. So they cannot finance long-term activities in the sense that these funds can be called anytime. But we have a way to make sure that we give you at low interest rate, and we also give you long-term to pay, irrespective of whether you are going into manufacturing directly or you are coming for working capital.
Yeah.
You find in Africa in particular, a lot of people want to say, I have established my factory. The factory is there, but unfortunately, you don't have funds to buy raw materials. So we also support them, making sure that they have funds that they can buy raw materials. We also have a lot of respect for the commercial banks, because a good number of people come in, especially under the large enterprises, are people that have been in business for a long time. If you want to give a loan to such enterprise, the problem is, how would you secure that loan?
Yeah.
So we encourage the commercial banks to bring them to us. These are customers they've known for years, they've been supporting. We will give you loan, but you give us guarantee because you know this bank, you know these customers very well. You have control over their funds, you have control over their activities, you know them for a very long time, and therefore you can support them. So we do quite a lot of that. We have also, I know you are looking at your time, done quite a lot in the sense that 7 years back, 6 years back, we were only in 7 areas. But the best way to serve the SMEs in particular is to be close to them. We have expanded to 30 states as we speak. There are 36 states in Nigeria, plus the Federal Capital Territory, but we have expanded to 30 states at the moment. This is to get close to them. We have also engaged what we call business development partners. These business development partners are experts that understand our business, are experts that live with these customers and would-be customers, prospects, in different environments. They know what we are looking for.
I think let's just leave it there, but you've raised a number of important issues, which is fundamentally for me giving entrepreneurs a little bit of breathing space so that they can get their businesses off the ground, they can delay in repaying their debts, they can focus on the operational issues, and then leverage all of the support at the time at which loans must be repaid, which is not a testimony that many African entrepreneurs have. Yesterday, Mr. Ebenezer Tafali, I sat with the new Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and we had a broad and interesting conversation. One of them was this issue of integrating African manufacturers into local value chains. That's the first one. And what emerged from that conversation is, in order for you to integrate SMEs into regional value chains, you need to make it easier for them to transact across borders. And this is where issues around customs, excise duties become really very, very important. That's essentially the work you do. So tell us about customs procedures, trade facilitation measures, and the kinds of constraints that African manufacturers often lament as being barriers to them being able to work within regional networks. Yeah, it's on now, definitely. Go, don't touch it again. No? Okay. Okay. Yes, it's on now. There you go.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Moderator. You are very right. It is common knowledge that Africa has a very low rate of integration in the global value chain, and also that intra-African trade is at a very low level. It is often estimated at around 15%. Of course, border procedures have a very important role to play as far as regional integration is concerned, as far as integration of African economies into the global value chain is concerned. I think that is why customs administrations all around the continent, and I don't see any exception, they are all engaged in a process of reform and modernization, a process of capacity building to help them to put in place procedures that are trader-friendly, to put in place procedures that would enable the rapid clearance of goods. Now, at the global level, the World Customs Organization, which I represent here, has developed a number of tools and instruments which it has been using to help its 183 members around the globe, member customs administrations, to simplify and facilitate trade. We can talk here of the revised Kyoto Convention, which is a convention that puts in place simplified and harmonized procedures for customs clearance. I think most customs administrations on the continent have acceded to that convention. They are applying that convention. It has also put in place the safe framework of standards for the safety and facilitation of the supply chain. Because of the security concerns that arose at one point in time, it became obvious that countries were going to go in for tighter controls of imports and exports. But then these standards seek to reconcile trade facilitation and trade security, so that trade security should not suffer. And then there is also customs cooperation, because you also need customs cooperation to be able to facilitate. You know, if customs across the borders are talking to themselves, they have that trust in themselves, then it becomes easier for traders to move across borders, and that's how the concept of the tool of globally networked customs, whereby customs and administrations could exchange information to be able to make to ease the movement of goods across the borders. But you also have the data model, and then there is also the WCO capacity building framework on data analytics. We know that data analytics has become key in our days to facilitate trade in terms of its use, for instance, for risk management. When you use risk management, instead of controlling all the cargo that is passing through your border or is entering into your territory, if you use proper risk management, you are going to control only a small portion of that cargo, and as such, maybe about 80–90% is allowed to pass through the borders. Many customs administrations are employing risk management.
I think we can leave it there, and then we can expand on some of those issues. I think you've raised some important technical things to consider, especially I'm intrigued by the data analytics issue, because if we can just digitize so many systems, it would make streamlining the system so much better. Gwen, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. The last 18 months has been very difficult for everyone, whatever your station in life, whatever your industry. And I heard an epidemiologist the other day say, we're not living through a COVID crisis. We're actually living in what we call a COVID era. This is something that's going to be with us for some time. And everybody needs to adapt their business model, certainly for the foreseeable future, around health and health protocol issues, and making sure that whatever product you produce, you've taken into consideration the supply chain disruptions caused by COVID, the possibility of further shutdowns, and the very real possibility of having a significant proportion of your workforce staying home if they're not vaccinated. What does that mean technically for a business that needs to get up and running in this COVID era, and what kinds of support should they receive and can they receive from an organization like AfCFTA? Because I know that initially you launched a bond, a facility to help many governments procure medicines, ultimately get onto the buying system internationally. But what other kinds of technical support are required?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Lorata. You're absolutely right. I think, the last 18 months have really been defining for all of us. And the first point I'd like to make is I think one of the key learnings from the last 18 months is just how vulnerable Africa is compared to the rest of the world. I remember at the onset of the pandemic, you couldn't even access face masks. Production was happening in China. We had a couple of governments trying to procure face masks. They were paying $50 for a face mask. And there was no production capacity on the African continent. So one of the first responses that we did as AfCFTA was to speak to some of our clients that were already in manufacturing, because there was at that point no time to start building factories from the ground up, but to speak to clients that already have factories and finance them so they could retool those factories and start to produce health-related supplies. So all of a sudden we had entrepreneurs who were producing face masks, hand sanitizers, and other PPE on the African continent. That was just the first, I think that was around March, April. As the pandemic deepened, we thought it would be around, coronavirus would be with us for only a few months and it would go away. It didn't go away. And then the vaccine story started. Africa sat back and watched the rest of the world being vaccinated. We had no access to vaccines. We had the money, but we couldn't find a supplier to supply us with the vaccines. So that vulnerability, again, AfCFTA, working with the AU, Africa CDC, and UNECA, came together, spoke to all our African governments and said, look, if a small country tries to go to a Pfizer or a Johnson & Johnson and try to negotiate, they won't give you the time of day because the Western countries had already put down big money. So through a pooled procurement mechanism, we were able to aggregate the requirements of the African continent and enable them to procure vaccines. And why is that important? Because in order for us to go back to some kind of normalcy, we needed to be vaccinated. Otherwise, we would be shut out of our jobs. We wouldn't be able to return to work. We wouldn't be able to travel as Africans if we're not vaccinated. So basically, we would be isolated. Yeah. So that procurement piece, whilst is not value-adding, was an important first step to making sure that Africa can reopen safely. Many of our African countries are very tourism-dependent for their economies. So it was important that we open up safely, by first securing the safety of the citizens within Africa and attract tourism and even other foreign direct investment back into the continent. So looking forward, we now have started the conversations around what does it look like going forward? People are returning to work. We don't want to end up in another situation, particularly to the point that you made that the pandemic will eventually transition into an endemic. It's something that we have to learn to live with. But we need to start thinking about manufacturing those medical supplies on the African continent. So Afreximbank is very instrumental in leading that charge and that conversation, and we are in negotiations with several vaccine manufacturers to start identifying sites on the African continent, but not just to manufacture and ship the vaccines back out to the Western countries, but to put in their caveats that they have to supply Africa, they have to transfer the technologies to African manufacturers so that we're never again left in the position that this pandemic put us in.
Okay, thank you. So far I've heard finance and financing support is very important. Systems for trade facilitation are important. Health and being able to get the necessary supplies is critical. So Obi, as I turn to you, let's talk about logistics and talk about the nuts and bolts of what it is to trade on the African continent. Hard infrastructure issues, roads that work, rail that work, electricity that's consistent, and the stuff that's macro, but really is fundamental for any manufacturer to be able to function. What are the kinds of policies that are needed? What is the kind of support that's needed? What are those missing links that are beyond the realm of an individual manufacturer to produce, but that is intrinsic to their success?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that one of the challenges we have in Africa is the really low level of infrastructure, and that has a huge impact on the ability of businesses to really operate on scale. So the introduction of the AfCFTA obviously creates a very great opportunity to connect the infrastructure on the continent to make it possible for businesses to operate from one country into the other. But again, looking at that, I also see, I come at it from the area of information, because you find that one of the challenges we have across the continent is that in spite of what we are doing towards integration, there's still a huge problem in terms of businesses knowing what is available in what country. So you still find situations where African businesses are importing things from outside the continent that they can actually procure less expensively and more locally from another country on the continent. So you, for instance, find that somebody is importing content for leather from outside Africa when you can get it from just the next country. So that lack of information is one of the huge challenges confronting the continent. So I believe that there's a need to really focus on that information sharing to make sure that you circulate details about what is available where. Create a database or a network that lets people know what is available. That should be some kind of an important area of focus in what we're doing.
Right. Creating new markets is very important. Masela, what is important to you? I mean, you mentioned earlier on issues around skills, but I also know that for you, infrastructure support is a very important one.
Sorry, I didn't get that. I didn't get that.
I said, what is important to you? Earlier on, you mentioned skills being something you're passionate about, but also support through infrastructure as well.
The current investment in infrastructure, it is estimated that we are looking at 495 billion throughout the continent. And what informs that we could do better, what informs that is the demand, and we need to find bankable projects, but how banks assess risk from the African perspective, it actually disadvantages us. But looking at Afreximbank as an African bank, have a clear knowledge of what these risks are. And we look at skills, we are often led to believe that we don't have skills. We do have skills. We have skills that are African-based. We know what is required by our environment. We have standards that work in Africa. The last thing that we want to have is us as the continent being colonized through standards, and then therefore excluding the Africans or our brothers and sisters and African manufacturers. We have seen it happen. For us, it's important that we have African-centric solutions that are informed by the skills that are appropriate for the continent.
Okay. Kemi, I'd like to bring you in, especially because you live outside of the continent. You're a daughter of the soil, but you're working internationally. And from your vantage point, you can really see what a supply chain problem looks like and what a supply chain opportunity looks like. Could you talk us through how African manufacturers can be integrated into global value chains, especially given the disruptions we've seen in COVID? So if we believe that the worst is over and that the world is ready to open up again, transact, how do African manufacturers go about getting themselves connected into global value chains and making sure that they can access products despite the disruptions in the supply chains that we've seen?
Thank you very much for your question. Thank you very much.
It's Kemi's turn. Yes, Kemi.
Thank you very much for your question. It is true that COVID-19 has impacted global supply chains in a manner that has prompted many nations to begin to reassess and review their internal manufacturing capabilities so that they do not continue to depend on other countries for basic supplies, particularly in sectors like pharmaceutical and medical supplies, as we have seen during the pandemic. But essentially, my opinion is that that situation, the disruption, is a temporary situation that is going to improve, or it will auto-correct itself with time. So I'm not really so worried about the inward thinking of some of these countries. I'm very worried. What concerns me, and I'm really worried about, is the fact that Africa has a historical pattern of poor performance when it comes to share of global trade and even regional trade. So if we have to be honest, it's not COVID-19 that is responsible for Africa having a poor share of global trade that's at about 3% or less than 3%. We all know the figures, and also the regional trade that is very poor within the continent. That's not the impact of COVID-19. So basically, there are foundational issues, foundational problems that must be addressed. So I don't believe that COVID-19 or this disruption, the inward thinking of these countries will continue, because there's no country that is self-sufficient. I don't believe that globalization is going to be reversed. We will continue to depend on each other. We will continue to export what we have and import what we don't have. I mean, there are so many factors that are responsible for that. Factors of production, for example, are not concentrated in one location. If you have land, you need capital from somewhere else. If you have technology, you need manpower from somewhere else. So that international trade and global trade will continue. But what can Africa do to ensure that we integrate into that the global value chain? Based on the research that we have done in the organization that I work for, as I said, my concern is not COVID and all of that, but the biggest problem, when we analyze some of these fundamental issues, a lot of people talk about lack of infrastructure, fragmentation of the market, standard issues and stuff like that. Yeah, I believe that those issues exist, but those are not the biggest challenges limiting African manufacturers from integrating into the global value chain. What we see in our own study and research is lack of government intervention, is lack of government support for small businesses. And I can quickly expatiate on that if I have a minute. What we are trying to achieve When we talk about global market integration, we're trying to compete. We want African manufacturers to be able to compete with other advanced countries that are already established, and they have already established a stronghold in that space, in the global market space for years. They are richer countries, and we are not ready to fund the process. We are not ready. I engage as somebody who represents my organization across Africa. Many countries do not even have a national economic development strategy that is based on outward orientation. And it is through exporting that we can achieve this. Okay. So we really need a good strategy, and exporting does not just happen by chance. It requires a lot of strategy, and it requires funding. Some of these countries that we want to compare with and we want to build global competitiveness to compete against them, USA, Japan, Germany, they have millions of budget. For example, in the US has more than 20 federal government agencies that are involved in supporting US exports. We don't have that structure here that I'm aware of. And that's just at the federal level. We have not talked about the state and other levels of engagement.
Okay, so I have a testimony I'd like to share very briefly, or just be honest with the audience. So everything you've heard here is what the speakers had asked me to give them an opportunity to say. It's time for my questions now. What you haven't prepared for, get ready. I want to know something. Africa's manufacturing output today is close to 2%, conservatively 1.5%. That's less than what Africa used to manufacture in the 1970s, which was its share of global manufacturing 3%. So in fact, we're in a process of decline. Simply put, deindustrialization. So we are sitting here in 2021, using words like competitiveness, integrating in value chains, and yet the reality on the ground is that factories are being shut down for all manner of reasons, infrastructure reasons, economies contracting, funding problems. But we're sitting here in a forum and saying, let's get African manufacturers into global and regional value chains because there's an African continental free trade area. Who is fooling who here in this story? Anyone?
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. I quite agree with you. And sitting here, I'm facing my brothers and sisters from Africa. The fact remains that, listen, irrespective of what we decide to do or what we want to say, not until when we face some critical areas and resolve them, we will not move forward. One, even if you produce the goods, how do you move them? When half the continent is in crisis, we have wars all over the place. Some internally, leaders have refused to agree with certain sections, and therefore you have issues. I have customers in Nigeria who have customers across Africa. But at the time, we had to restructure the facilities we gave them because they could produce but could not transport them. Goods moved from Nigeria up to Central African Republic. But because of security issues, they could not. Yeah. So you go to their warehouses and see things that have been produced to move, but they could not move. Yeah. So not until when we face the issue of security and address that issue squarely, no matter the support you want to give to entrepreneurs, it will be half because they will produce and they can't take them out. Number two, the issue of technology. COVID has shown to us that technology is key to whatever they do. If we do not encourage them and make sure that they key into it, use technology in every aspect of what they are doing, it will be difficult for us to compete with our outside world because they can advertise, they can order, they can do everything while sitting in their bathrooms even. With that tablet you have in your bathroom, you can order for everything. If our people are still sitting, waiting for people to come to them at the factory level to order, we will not move forward.
I appreciate your
Thirdly, government policies. Now, we know how difficult it is to fund the SMEs. If government policies are relaxed a little bit across Africa. Because even if we give you what you want, the funding and other things, you go across and the custom officer or the custom office have different idea of what is going on. You are kept there. I have seen customers whose goods got destroyed at the border because of one little thing. So not until when we are able to address our policies in Africa to encourage entrepreneurs, to encourage manufacturers, it will still be difficult. During COVID year last year, Bank of Industry brought in over $2 billion into Nigeria. Yeah. Over $2 billion to support our customers. Some of them have taken the loans, but we have to restructure because they can't produce. Yeah. So these are some of the things that Africa should be looking at. If you have an enabling environment, you have the support, I can tell you we can compete with anybody.
Mr. Omar, I've got a question, and I appreciate your candor. I think those are the conversations we should be having in Africa. There's too much waffle, and I'm tired, frankly. So, do you think the business community is operating in a parallel universe to the policymakers? Because we see DFIs coming in to try to crowd in and help manufacturers with debt and debt restructuring. We see commercial banks whom you're working with. In everything you've said this morning, I've not heard you say the support from the Treasury, the support from the Ministry of Industry. Do the politicians have a different understanding of this economy to everybody else?
Thank you very much. That's a beautiful question, and my Minister of Industry is somewhere around, so I'm going to face him. Yes, I think we think differently. On the others, I give you one example that probably you'll be thinking about it all night.
Yeah.
This is Intra-African Trade Fair.
Yeah.
I have customers whose goods are here, but they're not here because of visa issue.
Thank you.
These are customers that we're supporting. These are customers that AfroExim is supporting. These are customers that the entire Africa is supporting. Come and have a handshake with their brothers and sisters in Africa. See how we can partner. They are in Lagos, Abuja, and the rest of the cities thinking of what to do with their goods that have arrived here. So that tells you the difference between those that are in business and those that are in government. We have to think together. We need their support.
Yeah.
It is not that we are appealing. It is compulsory. Otherwise, these countries will not move forward, because if you do not manufacture, people will bring in, you use your hard-earned foreign currency or earnings to buy these goods.
Yeah.
And if you are not producing, you are not moving anywhere.
Fantastic.
You will be consuming.
I want to move this conversation along and go to the COVID question. HIV is also valid here. One of the reasons, Gwen, that it was so difficult to procure the vaccines, or even to get into the queue, is because everybody else in the West had ordered their vaccines long before the Africans did. Others could then produce locally, but those who are producers in the United States had the intellectual property, the patents weren't being waived, it became a big brouhaha at the WTO, everybody's talking about it. But the fact is, intellectual property is a very real and a fundamental aspect of manufacturing. You have an idea, you have a prototype, you want to develop it, you have to be able to trademark that thing by law, and then begin the research development, and then the production of your idea. Many people in Africa have ideas, but it's how the idea unravels along the value chain. Long before we get to the supply chain and the global value chain, just registering the idea, getting the machinery to research and develop it, then produce it, then bring it into the market. A lot of things fall apart at the start over things like intellectual property. What can be done to improve that kind of system? Because we talk here as if you manufacture a good and then you go to a market. No, even before you produce the very first item, a lot of other legal and contractual things need to have happened.
You're absolutely correct, Lerato. That is one of the biggest challenges, particularly for the SME sector. So I think some of the solutions that we could look at, and AfCFTA Bank obviously being one of the African-led DFIs, can help in that regard, is first there needs to be an education around how people should be protecting their intellectual property, copywriting their ideas. We have I mean, even during this trade fair, there's a huge creatives segment because that market is so huge. For many, many years, African film, African music has been popular, but their intellectual property rights have not been protected. You can buy copyright CDs on the street, etc. That is improving, of course, now. So with organizations, if you look to DFIs, there are programs that help with capacity building. There are also programs for advisory, where they up-and-coming producers, people who have creative ideas, be they scientific or creative, can be taught about how to protect and copyright and patent those ideas so that when they monetize, they benefit from the monetization of those ideas. So that's the first step. And then after that regulatory piece has been dealt with, you correctly pointed out, you then go into research and development and incubating your idea. Again, speaking to the DFIs, they're a good partner. For example, AfCFTA has a project preparation facility which helps early stage, majorly SME projects with funding for them to be able to do that research, fund their business plan. And once the program or project is viable, they can then get funding from AfCFTA, and that what was initially a loan to be repaid when they've monetized their project can then be integrated into a long-term loan and repaid. And that helps a lot because a lot of projects fail in the early stage because not the right enough R&D is done. You don't do enough market research. But if I just expand a little bit further, and then when you now move into the stage where you now are producing goods and you want to sell your goods, I think as a continent, we need to start working together. So AfCFTA is a great step towards that goal because we're too fragmented as a continent. If we look at the successes of Asia and Asia Pacific, they started and have very successfully developed export trading companies. I mean, companies like Hyundai, some of the electronics companies as well, it's not owned by one individual in terms of the components that go into that process. It's hundreds and thousands of little SMEs producing small components which are then put through this value chain, and the television, telephone, or motor vehicle is then produced and sold to the rest of the world under one brand. So Africa also has an opportunity through the SMEs to industrialize. You touched on a very important point about we've deindustrialized. We need to go back to industrialization, building industrial parks in free economic zones, having small component manufacturing, and each country can play to its own strengths. So specializing in certain areas. If I use fashion as an example, there are some fashion designers where you have the finished outfit, but it's not designed by and made by one person. Somebody was contracted to just do the sleeves. Somebody else is only doing the collar. And then you have the finished, and you can replicate this across all industries. So this is, I think, for us as an African continent, is where we need to go, aggregating our expertise, and then selling made in Africa products as a continent in order to compete globally.
I love how you've just aggregated that. And I mean, just some figures. If people think research and development is not important, on average, an OECD country spends about 4 to 5% of their GDP on R&D. And that's also a similar figure, 4 to 6, even 10% for big companies like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. That's how much they spend per annum of their revenue on research and development. That's why they can keep on churning improvements and new products into the market. If we're not doing that at base level, what is this value addition when we are producing goods that should be competitive and for an international market? We need to be having some of these conversations. I do like what you're saying, and maybe somebody can answer us here in terms of what an industrial policy looks like. I love the example that's often used regarding the European Union when that union was set up, is that they'd just come out of a war. Most of the countries had been decimated, but they were going to use their competitive advantages and respective skill sets to help to rebuild a Europe. And so the example is often in building, I think it's an Airbus, you can correct me. So the idea is to build an airplane, but the wing will be done in France. The engine will come from Britain, the engineering and electronics from Germany, the leather and the aesthetics from Italy. How can we do that in Africa where we know what, regionally, who's best at what, who's got what local raw materials, and how to start pooling those resources together? Because perhaps that's the model that's needed.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, if I may, just to build on the point that I made earlier, you're absolutely right. You've hit the nail on the head. And again, I think what is lacking in initiating that type of initiative at the onset is nobody with the political will to put the investment in. So, and this is where DFIs become very important. Bank of Industry, the African banks, the African development banks, to put the funding up front to build the industrial parks, which then attracts the companies that come and start building on that specialization for the respective components in order to build the finished product. So somebody needs to step up. So Afrexim Bank is playing a huge advocacy role in engaging with governments so that they can identify and give the tax incentives for these industrial parks to be set up, and then fund the companies that come in. But the export trading company model, exactly as you described with Airbus, is a route that Africa should be taking. And again, Afrexim Bank is taking the lead in aggregating export trading companies, be it in the soft commodity space. Small or light manufacturing is another area where export trading companies can be aggregated. We have a huge diaspora outside of the African continent, food products, making that, you have a certified quality assurance so that you don't have such a high rejection rate of goods that are exported out of Africa. So yes, I think that the future is absolutely for everybody to play to their strengths. You don't have to start with a gold standard. Everybody specializes in a certain area across different African economies. Some have competitive advantage because maybe they can produce power cheaper, so then they focus on that. Others have the technical know-how. Others have the raw commodities, so you all come together, aggregate, and then export the finished product.
I know Obi wants to add, and Mr. Tafili as well, so we'll start with you. Go.
Yeah, I think the current tariff barriers are also an impediment, except for maybe some of those countries who are already in regional economic communities with tariff preferences. And I think that the advent of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is going to be a plus, but provided that the political will is there to implement tariff concessions, provided that the rules of origin that have been put in place to accompany those tariff concessions are well implemented, and implemented in such a way that it is not costly. Because at the end of the day, what is going to be the motivating factor is the preference margin. That is the difference between, for a particular product, the difference between the duties and taxes you will pay, bringing those that product from outside the continent, and the zero or very low duties and taxes that you will pay when you source from within the continent. I think it is going to be very important. And just to come back again to policy issues, I think that one of our big problems in Africa too is that governments design policies almost single-handedly. We need public-private partnership. Trust, built on trusts. And before policies are designed, at least private sector representatives should be brought on board to be able to bring their own perspectives. Because you cannot sit in your office and you think that, okay, this is good for this sector in the economy, or that sector in the economy. It is he who wears the shoe that knows where it pinches.
Obi, you've got something to say?
No, I just think that you really hit the nail on the head. When you talked about the low level of research and development commitment across the continent. I mean, I don't see how we can become really fully competitive when we pay so little attention to research and development. That is the root of all progress. Innovation comes from that. So the more you are able to do research and then turn the results of the research into actual products, the better we can do across the board.
Ms. Stella?
when you talked about research and development, I had a big smile on my face. The creepy crawly to clean the swimming pool was actually the research and the development was done in a garage in Springs. So research and development does not lie in big companies only, but we have the engineering know-how of which we can apply in terms of research and development. But also, it's not only the funds that should be made available. Policy reform, structural reform, this is where the opportunities are. Private sector will find value in structural reform. For an example, South Africa to the core network. One company on the day says 17 billion rands are put on the table. So they all talk to each other. So political will, yes, it's there. In some instances, it depends. It depends who you have in leadership on the day. But what is quite, for me, disappointing is making quick decisions, implementing them immediately, but we have to have a marriage between private sector and government so that we don't talk past each other.
Fair enough. Kemi, I'd like to bring you into the conversation, and I want to move it along now and make way for questions from the floor. So please start getting your questions ready. And this is your lens, the world from your lens, because you live in the United States, which is great for innovation, great for financing, great for so many things that support entrepreneurs. In fact, in America, we're told that entrepreneurs are allowed to go bankrupt and they'll be supported again. You're not left there to fail. So I just want you to bring in a perspective there. And this is an industrial policy question, but let me ask it. So there's industrial policy and it entails everything. Incentives, funding, electricity, infrastructure, all of the things that we know. But what is an industrial policy that is suitable for the 21st century, for where we find ourselves today? A world that is digitized, a world where young people are innovating using technology, factories that are automated. We need an industrial policy, yes, but we need an industrial policy for the kind of world that is upon us. What would that look like in Africa? What would you suggest?
Thank you so much again for your question. So this is another issue or topic that has been widely discussed, and we have not really seen much action behind it. When we talk about the global competitiveness that we're talking about here today, basic understanding of that means that whatever we are producing on the continent, we want to be able to sell those products in advanced countries, in other markets. And the process for that, or the procedure for that, it looks complicated, but it's actually very possible. As you have said, it's not impossible with technology and with the right strategy, with the right programs in place to be able to do some of those things. So basically, we know that what is required for us to do is technical assistance. Technical assistance is what is needed. Some of the challenges that we have on the continent today, other parts of the world have experienced that in the past and they have overcome those challenges. I will give a typical example of Latin America, which has a very similar business environment as we have here in Africa. There was a time in the past they used to have difficulties sending their product or exporting their product into other developed market, the US market and all that. But with the right technical assistance and right export development programs, they were able to overcome that barrier. Today, they have their products well integrated in the US market. I keep talking about the US market because I see it as a global market where everybody in the world is trying to get into. And if you do well in that market, most likely you have a high chance of succeeding in other markets. So the programs that we need to do, the expertise and the technology may not be available on the continent, but they are available elsewhere. This is education. We need to go to wherever we can find the solution and, get those. That's why I talked about government intervention before, because it's practically impossible for small businesses to be able to pay for this technical assistance. They're expensive. A small company in Africa here may not be able to pay $50,000 just for technical assistance. But if it's under a government program, then many SMEs will have the opportunity to be able to benefit from this.
I've got one more cheeky question, and then it's the floor. How would you respond if I said, not all, but in general, and it's a gross generalization, I accept that, but in general, Africans are consumers, they are not producers. They love to buy, they love to shop. They love to shop from overseas. They love to say, this is a Gucci bag, and this is a Versace dress. And they're happy with that arrangement. And up until the mindset shifts, we're not going to be producers.
Yeah. I was going to say in the previous discussion that it is always good to start from the basics. We should not, in our industrialization policy, yes, in the long term, we should think of conquering markets in developed countries. But we have some basic work to do, and putting in place industries that can transform our local materials. As you rightly said, we like shopping. We in Africa.
We're consumers.
So,
how about we producers?
Yeah, and import substitution industrialization policy that is well designed and implemented will do a lot of good. It will serve as a springboard. Outside there is so competitive. Yeah. What about among ourselves?
Yeah. There are African countries where 70% of their money is on an import bill. 70% of what you consume, utilize, comes from outside. How do you create a manufacturing sector when you're in that system? Oh, yeah.
No, I think I agree with you to some extent, but I also think that's a second side to it. I think Africans like quality. So sometimes it's not so much that they want the particular brand names as such. They are looking for quality products. And when you don't find the quality locally, then they kind of gravitate towards these other ones. So I think the challenge is for African producers to focus on producing quality products. Once we have that, I think that you're going to see that mind shift change.
That's the value add, yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah?
This is Africa, and I think we have to be realistic in the sense that, yes, we love to buy things from wherever we can get them. But the fact remains that we are not even producing. So if you're not producing, how do you take care of your needs? And what happened is that over time, we have neglected our industries, we've refused to change our policies, and therefore, if you go to, for example, Sharada in Kano, it is a ghost city because all the industries have been shut down. They are not producing. I remember when we were kids, when we would buy shoes from Bata, when you buy things from companies that were producing in Nigeria. But today, you can't because they are not even producing. Yeah. Now, even if they produce, they can't compete. Yeah. They are buying their diesel, they are running their generators, they are buying water, they have to construct their roads. Yeah. They are contending with security issues, so they are paying police 24 hours plus. So you find that even if you produce, chances are nobody will buy from you. Yeah. And in any case, how many times can you start a generator to produce how many sheds? Yeah. Now, another issue is we have refused to move from those policies. Students of political science will tell you, modes of production, from primitive to slave owning to tribute paid and up to capitalism and the rest of it. Now, you produce goods in West Africa, for example. You take them to the next country, and goods from France, because it has been colonized by France, goods from France have arrived there, and they are far cheaper than what you have brought from Nigeria. Yeah. You are left with your goods. Nobody is buying them because they are too costly for them to buy. And therefore, not until when we define what we want to do in terms of percentage. I quite appreciate what AfroExim and AFDB are doing currently. If you look at it, they are concentrating on building industrial parks, where you identify what is required in an environment, what they can do, provide the infrastructure, give the support with the government for manufacturers to produce.
Yeah.
You define the quality, you define already the market that they are going, and you give them all the support. Not until when we're able to do that, it will be extremely difficult for us not to stop buying from outside world while we are not producing.
Absolutely. It begins with the reindustrialization of Africa, creating local markets, and then the quality control issues. We've got an opportunity, 10 minutes for questions. So if you have a question, please stand up. Then we see you. Before we take your question, anybody who's going to ask a question, please stand up. I'm doing it like an auction. It's going, it's going, it's gone. Only those people standing, those 3 questions are the ones we're taking, and we'll take all 3 questions at once. Go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. Thank you for a very invigorating conversation. My name is Vuyelwa Nyagaza. I'm from a company called Sugume Trading and Investment. My question is to AfroExim Bank. I just wanted to understand a little bit more about, you talked about the, I think, export development companies. And I wanted to know exactly what it is that you're doing in that space and what happens, or how do people who are already in the journey work with you? Is there such possibilities?
Okay. If I understand it correctly, you were saying this kind of support that AfroExim Bank and organizations like them can lend people who've already begun the journey.
Exactly.
Okay, great stuff.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, good morning. My name is Emmanuel. I'm representing AGOA Investment. I'm into agriculture. Okay, I'll first of all say thank you very much, Lerato and your team. You've really spoken a lot that speaks to our mind. But there's something I just want to understand, why it is an African problem or it's a government problem. And unfortunately, I find myself in Africa. Because, for instance, in South Africa, we're told that when they produce apples, let me give 2 examples. When they produce apples, the best of the apples is sent to EU, abroad, the best of apples, like 500% quality. Then any of those apples with scratches or any damages is left on our shelves here in South Africa to consume. But it's actually grown here. Same with the cocoa from Ghana. It's sent to Spain. Then Spain produces the chocolate and now sends back chocolate to Ghana, bringing in millions. So what I say to Africa is this: why don't we allow those machines? Let's buy them and produce them in Ghana, for example, so that those chocolates will be exported back to Spain. So that's where we are producing. But I see that the government in Africa, they're after how much millions they're going to make from the cocoa, for example, into the government, and then, like South Africa, how much the apples is bringing in. So they don't even care about what we are doing here. So the government, to me, I think they really need to be educated. Please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Got it. Thank you. There's a gentleman here up front. Yes, sir. Any latecomers? A question? Please stand up, and that's it. And that's it. After these 2, yes, go ahead.
Morning to all. I'm Sponelo Nzimande from South Africa. My question is a generic question. I'm from the sector tourism, and obviously it's a very complex value chain sector, which touches almost on all aspects that you are raising. And for us, if you've got the economy running, automatically tourism becomes a beneficiary. My question, shouldn't be the focus be on standardizing issues of technology, issues of research, issues of innovation and creativity, so that collectively as a continent, our trade is affected by generic technology that is applicable to all countries, research, access, data, trends that are analyzed which are similar, depicting different markets, as well as innovation and creativity. So it's a question to all.
Okay, great stuff. Got it. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Maxime Winato. I represent the UN Women.
Could you do me a favor and remove your mask, please? Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. My question has to do with specific intersectional vulnerabilities that some businesses face. Women-led, women-owned businesses. We've seen in cross-border, we've seen a situation of, since we are talking about intra-Africa trade, when you look at what's happening in terms of differences in policies, differences in procedures, even from two bordering countries on the continent, where women are subject to harassment, difficulties to understand, complex. Sometimes you have the impression that the procedures are complexified on purpose. So what is the way out to remove the entry barriers for women to some lucrative dimensions of African trade? Thank you.
If I could take the liberty and say yesterday's conversation with the Secretary General of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area addressed exactly that issue. So if you could get a hold of that recording, I think your answer will come from there. Yeah.
Good morning. Good morning to everyone. My name is Max here from South Africa. And I just want to hear from panel, what are the lessons that we can learn from industrial parks or special economic zone? It's a program, I understand it was a model from Asia and then brought to Africa. But in the past 20 years, it's difficult to measure what we have achieved with that. Is that a program perhaps that need to maneuver to suit our condition, or it's a program that has failed completely? Maybe something else new need to be brought in space to replace it, or what could happen? Because from where I'm sitting, it doesn't work for us. Thank you.
Okay.
So those are five questions, and we have 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Okay, so just one person, if you can answer this question. Support for SMEs on their journey. I think this was very specifically for AfCFTA, Gwen.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for that great question. And I mean, one of the things that AfCFTA actually is doing is we are setting up, or have set up, an SME unit, because the levels of vulnerabilities and challenges that SMEs face are on several levels. Some of it is linked to lack of collateral, for example, to be able to access funding. Some of it is to do with lack of proper governance structures to be able to meet the credit risk criteria of banks, even local commercial banks. So AfCFTA is trying to facilitate for SMEs to be capacitized. And sometimes it's not debt that the SME needs, it might be equity. So AfCFTA has got a fund for export development, which is an equity subsidiary, which invests in projects for SMEs that have potential, for example, to export. And I think you also wanted to know how you can integrate into some of these export trading companies. Now, it depends, I guess, on the type of industry that you're in, because the model can work for fashion, it works for soft commodities. So if I use soft commodities as an example, you could, for example, be the aggregator. We know, for example, sesame seeds are in great supply, in great demand in Asia. If somebody got up and said, I'll be the aggregator, I will purchase sesame seeds from across Africa, semi-process, check the quality standard, and sell them and export, get good offtake as a brand. So you're now selling sesame that has originated from several parts of the African continent, but you brand it, meet their quality standards, and export. You find that you are now able to get offtake from big supermarkets, for example, rather than trying to export the limited sesame that you are able to grow on your limited patch of land. So that's one example.
Gwen, we're really pressed for time, so I would suggest if you could come and find AfCFTA. Let's move on. Anybody who's got a suggestion on standardizing of issues around creativity and innovation? Yes?
Well, I have a view, and we often have products in Africa that needs to be accredited by somebody, And for me, that is a fundamental problem. I cannot have an African manufacturer that manufactures in Africa and then talk about global value chain. A particular company, whilst I was doing this research, preparing for this, I asked them, so what do you need to access the European, American market? And I was told that certification, this and this and that. So on an annual basis, before you cough and look for business in those environments, how much do you have to pay? Say, we're looking in the region of 2 million rands. Now, that is absurd. We can't be accredited. When are we going to create an African standard? We are not reinventing the wheel. We create an African standard so that we trade with each other, and whoever comes on the continent to do business, they align with our standards. They invest their resources in our standards. We can't go forever accepting the EU standard today, the next day is the American standard, the next day is the Chinese standard. We cannot allow ourselves as Africans to be treated in this manner. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm going to integrate these last two questions, which is, you know, we produce for export. And the question was around consumption domestically. The example of cocoa and apples were used. But I think if I understand the question correctly, it's really how do you develop a local consumer market? Essentially is the question that's being asked, is that if I'm going to produce something and people have euros to buy my product, why shouldn't I sell it to Europe if I can't find buyers and customers here? So developing local markets becomes really important. And then linked to that is this issue of we can all look to models, an Asia export-led model, high volume exports, whatever. What are models for industrial and economic development that would work in Africa? Mr. Omar, I trust you. I believe you could.
Thank you very much. Two things. One, we have to be honest to ourselves, and that is the models are there for us to look at, see how they can fit into us. Unfortunately, a lot of times what we do is we copy the models and bring them in. But the fact remains that our environment is peculiar. Now, you can't export if people around you don't even value what you produce to buy from you. So I think deliberate policies have to be made. I know, for example, the Nigerian government has made deliberate policies that there are days in a week that every public servant has to wear made in Nigeria goods.
Nice.
That is a deliberate policy. But in Nigeria also, BOI has been championing that idea. We are in partnership with 22 state governments. What we say is, develop your local industries, provide funding. Whatever you provide, we will match it. If a state government is giving 1 billion naira for the local industries, we will match that 1 billion naira to make sure that standard is maintained and to make sure that those people have the capacity as well as the funding they need.
Right.
We also insist, and it has been helping in Nigeria, that before you throw money to an entrepreneur, make sure that entrepreneur has the capacity to even produce. Sometimes what they need is actually not the funding. What they need is the capacity. Someone who locally says, I need 20 million naira. When you provide him or her with this required capacity, the person will realize that all he needs is about 5 million naira.
Yeah.
You have saved 15 million naira. And because of that, he also is conscious of the fact that I am taking funding to produce goods.
Right.
As against, I am taking funding to marry more women. I'm taking funding to buy new cars and whatever. So capacity is important. Let our people understand it. And governments have to come in here.
Right.
Policy, deliberate policy. Development finance institutions have to play a lot of role here because you can only be able to serve them if you are close to them.
Fantastic.
And you can only do that if you have required funding, the required capacity to provide them with the capacity building they need to focus on what they are doing, as well as define the markets for them. For example, BOI, in partnership with the Office of the Vice President, Federal Republic of Nigeria, we have come to develop what we call shared facilities. We identify what is good in a particular environment, what they can produce, provide them with a facility like here, give them the machinery, and let them go in and produce at a minimum. So that all this idea of I have to buy diesel, I have to put a generator, I have to provide a road, I have to do all this, is taken away from them. It helps them to produce.
I think we need to leave it there. It's a big topic. It cannot be tackled in an hour and a bit. But I thank you that we chipped away at some of the important themes around supporting local manufacturing and also thinking big about integrating those value chains. Because the ideas are here, the money is here. What's needed is a little more understanding of what producers can produce and the market to know what local manufacturers can do. So please give a warm applause to Mr. Shekara Omar, who's the Executive Director of the Bank of Industry Nigeria, Mr. Ebenezer Tafali, who's the Deputy Director for Capacity Building at the World Customs Organization. Yeah, keep the applause going. Mrs. Kemi Aroshanian, who's the Director for the World Trade Center in Miami, Ms. Masela Ntapu from ARIA, Ms. Gwen Mwamba, who's the Director and Global Head for Trade at AfCFTA Bank, and Mr. Obi Emekwekwe, the President for Del Reeve Consult. And I think give yourselves an applause. You've been patient and you've asked really great questions. Thank you very much.
And your moderator, Lerato Mbele.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, if you could exit stage left.
African queen. A woman with the look of gold. Me are your king. You are my African queen. Oh no. Oh no. After you.